For centuries, archaeologists studied the hieroglyphs of Abydos, in Egypt, as if they were merely ceremonial inscriptions, tributes to forgotten kings and deities. But now, in the 21st century, a fragment ignored for decades has finally been deciphered. The language, which seemed redundant and symbolic, hides a pattern. And the message that surfaced has nothing traditional or spiritual. It speaks of an event, a cycle, of a presence that would come and return. And worse, it carries a date. What is leaving experts in silence is not the translation itself, but the content. A forecast made with astronomical precision, embedded in symbols that only now, with the use of artificial intelligence trained in dead languages, could be understood. And what it describes is uncomfortably close to happening. The fragment, recovered in 1998 during a dig parallel to the ruins of Seti I's temple, remained for more than 20 years stored in a dark room of the Luxor Museum. It was deemed irrelevant, part of a broken carving, without historical value. Until an independent group, funded by a German foundation, requested access to the forgotten archive and decided to digitize all material that had not yet been translated. Using neural networks trained with records of late ancient Egyptian, something emerged from that stone, not a religious text but a warning. A narrative blending astronomy, geological cycles, and a kind of calculation that, until today, was only possible with modern software. From that point, the atmosphere inside the archaeology team changed. The project leader, a Swiss Egyptologist named Marcus Heinz, vanished from social networks and declined interviews. One group member, who refused to be identified, said in a closed academic forum, "The deciphering was like turning on a light in a place that should not be lit." The message is troubling, mainly because it refers to us. What is read in the fragment, or rather, what was reconstructed from it, is not an isolated text. It appears to be part of a series of records that were purposefully hidden, in an attempt to preserve knowledge that was being hunted or rejected at the time. Hieroglyphic writing, as is known, went through phases of internal censorship, and some messages were deliberately erased by later priests and scribes. But this piece survived, buried between stone layers that likely protected it from destruction. The message begins with a description of the sky. Stellar alignments, lunar phases, and something that seems to indicate a geological oscillation. Terms like the return of the black waters, the star of fire approaching, and the people of shadows appear repeatedly. But the strangest part is the final passage, in which there is a count, a number that, when converted by today's astronomical dating tools, points to the year 2026. It is not the first time that inscriptions from ancient Egypt have been interpreted as warnings or predictions, but never with such a level of technical precision. And never with so many elements coinciding with modern scientific data, especially about climate changes, tectonic shifts, and magnetic disturbances. It is as if someone, more than 3,000 years ago, had left a message not for contemporaries, but for us. Within the group of researchers who accessed the full content of the deciphering, debates were intense. Some suggest the text is purely symbolic, a metaphor for a cycle of destruction and renewal, like so many found in ancient mythologies. Others, however, argue that the accuracy of the details, especially the astronomical ones, demands that the fragment be taken seriously. Egyptian authorities, in turn, adopted an uncomfortable silence. The Ministry of Antiquities refused to officially comment on the stone's content, and since Marcus Heinz's name was linked to the find, no new excavation at Seti I's temple has been authorized. The fragment in question, according to internal sources, was removed from the museum for conservation reasons, and taken to a laboratory in Tübingen, Germany, where it remains away from public eyes. What exactly does this message say? And why is it being treated with such caution? For those who believe that ancient civilizations had access to a kind of lost knowledge, whether about the sky, time, or even human nature itself, this may be the closest evidence of a direct message. Not a vague prophecy, but a specific calculation. And that is where the tension begins. The text states that the star of fire will cross the skies for the second time, when the cycle of 36 centuries is complete. The first cycle, according to the reverse counts made by the German team, would have ended precisely in 1376 BC. The next would be now. What does this symbol of star of fire represent? A celestial body? A geological event? Or something we do not yet comprehend? For now, no one knows. But the records continue being analyzed, and pressure for answers is increasing. And what is coming, or what is returning, may be older than any empire. What intrigues researchers the most is not only the hieroglyphs' content, but the place where they were found. Excavators were working near the ancient temple of Osiris, in Abydos, when they encountered a buried chamber not present in any map. The space, covered by thousands of years of sand and limestone, was sealed with blocks of solid stone. Nothing indicated that there was anything beyond abandoned ruins. Upon entering the chamber, they faced walls entirely carved with symbols never before catalogued. They did not belong to classical Egyptian writing, nor to the final phase of hieratic. They were hybrid forms, some resembling Sumerian carvings, others reminiscent of Meroitic, the still undeciphered language of the Kushite kingdom. But there was one detail that did not go unnoticed. The chamber ceiling was filled with depictions of human figures with erased mouths. Some had been deliberately scratched or hammered, as if someone in the past had tried to erase a warning or silence something. The archaeologist in charge of the team, Dr. Fadel Hamdi, reported in an interview that he had never felt such strong discomfort before a discovery. And he was not the only one. 2 excavation members abandoned the site in the following days, claiming illness and recurring nightmares with the symbols seen inside the chamber. Initially, it was thought to be an unknown cultic language, used only by a marginal sect of ancient Egypt. But when the images of the hieroglyphs were analyzed by artificial intelligence trained in linguistic and morphological patterns, something completely different surfaced. The AI began detecting patterns that matched no known dead language, but structures of temporal prediction. Sequences repeating cyclically, as if describing future events, encoded in metaphors. Among the translated fragments were terms like "the mouths of the living shall be sealed," "the dark waters will overtake the hills," and one that caused widespread unease: "the return of inverted time shall come under the second eclipse." Many dismissed these phrases as part of apocalyptic rituals common in ancient cultures, but the logical pattern in the structure suggested something beyond religious belief. It was a data system. A primitive type of catastrophic event timetable. One of the most controversial passages, however, was censored before reaching official press. It leaked in fragmented form by one of the excavation assistants who secretly recorded photos on his phone. That passage said, "When the light of the north becomes flesh, and the skies change their name, the lineage of the first will be broken." This kind of sentence brought intense speculation in archaeological, occultist, and scientific forums. Some believe it refers to Earth's geomagnetic reversal. Others, to a metaphor for civilizational crises, like the collapse of global political systems. But a third strand, less publicized, connects the term light of the north to a specific entity from the Egyptian pantheon, Sekhmet, the goddess of cyclical destruction. In Egyptian mythology, Sekhmet was sent by Ra to punish humanity. But her power was so devastating that the god himself had to intoxicate her with false blood to stop her from destroying everything. The fragment of hieroglyphs seems to suggest the return of this destructive cycle, not as myth, but as a predicted pattern. Another detail that provoked debate was the precision of certain geological descriptions found in the carvings. One mentions a sea rising over solid ground and carrying with it the dust of forgotten kings, accompanied by symbols representing waves above pyramids. This passage was linked by some researchers to accelerated melting of polar ice caps, something completely outside the radar of 3,000-year-old science. The major twist, however, did not come from universities or institutes of archaeology, but from an unexpected source, a German startup using AI to decipher Dead Sea religious texts. They were discreetly hired to analyze the raw data of the hieroglyphs recorded in the Abydos chamber. What they found challenged everything known about ancient prophecies. According to internal reports that leaked in encrypted forums, part of the hieroglyphs are not only predictions, but warnings about temporal manipulations. There are references to men who walk before the sun rises, beings who speak tongues not yet created, and most unsettling, children who bury their parents before being born. These phrases, though disturbing, contain a mathematical structure in their writing that, according to the AI, simulates a language based on temporal loops. In other words, they are not merely symbolic messages, they are formulas describing time as something non-linear. And worse, they show interference in that flow. For the boldest theorists, this discovery indicates that ancient civilizations may have had access to technologies or knowledge we today associate with science fiction. As if they had witnessed ruptures in time, and attempted to record it with the resources of their era. At the center of all this confusion, the Egyptian government chose to restrict access to the newly uncovered chamber. Photographic records were partly seized, and to this day, no official video of the chamber's interior has been released. The silence is almost total. And that alone already raises suspicion. The analysis of the artifact known as the Tablet of Asher, discovered in an intact tomb south of Thebes, was the turning point. For years, this limestone block was dismissed as a common repetition of religious chants. But in 2024, an interdisciplinary team from Uppsala University applied machine learning models trained not only on ancient Egyptian, but also on neighboring dialects, Proto-Semitic, and dead languages sharing symbolism with the Nilotic tradition. The result was something initially kept secret. The message, in its most accepted translation, began with a warning: "From the sky fell the seed that maddens men." The phrase, ambiguous and poetic, could be taken as a religious metaphor. But as the hieroglyphs advanced, the tone shifted. The tablet described an entity from the dark eye of the sky, a term occasionally used by scribes to describe unknown regions of the cosmos, that would touch Earth in cycles that do not fit within the fingers of a life. This entity, according to the text, was not a deity in the classical sense, but a force, a pattern, a recurring intelligence. And most disturbing, according to the inscription, it marks the minds of men, clothes itself with their voices, and guides them to the abyss without their noticing. This figure appeared tied to the symbol of the spiral serpent, one of the oldest and most recurring across world cultures, from Egypt to pre-Columbian Mexico, from Mesopotamia to Scandinavia. The tablet's final passage was the most alarming. It read, "When metal sings without mouth, when light speaks without flame, the serpent will return." This excerpt was first discredited for seeming purely symbolic, but gained new weight when associated with modern communication technologies. The metal that sings and the light that speaks became references to digital transmissions, screens, virtual assistants, and in bolder interpretations, to artificial intelligence systems that today replicate human voices and make decisions without awareness. The project's chief researcher, Dr. Michael Ostberg, initially kept the translation restricted to the team. But after an internal leak, part of the content ended up in closed forums of researchers and enthusiasts of linguistic cryptography. The impact was immediate, not only because of the nature of the content, but because of the historical context. The tablet had been buried alongside a priest from the time of Pharaoh Merneptah, known for his apocalyptic writings. Reports that this priest had gone mad days before his death, repeating nonsensical phrases about voices coming from living rock and the sky that opens eyes, now gained a new meaning. Other archaeological records were revisited in light of this discovery. Mural paintings once attributed to solar rituals began to be interpreted as depictions of cosmic downfall. In one, a human figure has its head shattered by a ray from the sky, while a black entity, with no defined form, raises a balance that tilts only one way. The symbolism was interpreted by some as the announcement of an irreversible imbalance. The strangest part is that the tablet's final translation was anonymously published in a linguistic database, with encrypted comments suggesting that other similar pieces had been found, but were being deliberately concealed. The hypothesis that this message was not an isolated case, but part of a network of warnings spread across different civilizations, gained strength. Comparative studies with symbols of Proto-Elamite and Indus Valley writing revealed similar patterns of spirals, vertical eyes, and circular narrative structures. There are records that the artificial intelligence which deciphered the tablet froze during the last rendering of the text. The system, according to project logs, repeated the same character 1,000 times before restarting, a three-headed serpent. When the technicians checked the database, that symbol did not appear in any base vocabulary. It is at this point that the line between historical enigma and contemporary fear dissolves. Some believe that this 3,000-year-old message is not a symbolic warning, but an objective description of collapse cycles caused by forces not understood, and that we are on the brink of another. Others, more skeptical, argue that it is all just a forced interpretation. But even the latter admit that there is something unsettling in the fact that these messages increasingly echo within the structures we ourselves have built. Machines that learn, voices that imitate, decisions that escape our control. And even if it is all coincidence, why would the tablet have been buried with someone who, according to funerary records, believed he had seen the face of truth covered in mirrors? What was truly sealed beneath the sand 3,000 years ago may not have been only a belief. Perhaps it was a cycle, a mirror that returns. What began with an abandoned inscription on a stone slab, kept for centuries in the shadows of a forgotten temple, proved to be much more than a simple funerary note. It was a message, a warning, or perhaps, a desperate record from a people who already foresaw their own end. The marks left by that 3 millennia-old civilization do not speak only of their gods or of death. They speak of us. Of cycles. Of repetitions extending across generations until someone, in some remote future, finally deciphers the pattern. The signs carved in the past now converse with the artificial intelligence of the present. And in this encounter, something new arises. Or perhaps, something far too ancient for us to fully comprehend. What once was buried under layers of dust and silence now stares back at us, revealing names, symbols, and predictions that seem written not for the ancients, but for those who came after. This is not mysticism. The researchers who worked on this project are scientists, linguists, historians, and programmers. People who avoid exaggerated interpretations and prefer data to dogma. But even they hesitated when the text's pattern revealed words like awakening, corruption of the earth, the return of silence, and most of all, when time breaks, the children of the sun shall fall. None of these expressions can be interpreted literally without falling into interpretive traps. But the problem is that there is internal coherence. The writing style shifts as the content shifts. The syntactic structure follows the text's turn. There are parallels with other records, in different languages. The symbolic vocabulary matches inscriptions of the Indus Valley, Proto-Elamite seals, the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is not coincidence. It is pattern. Here is where reflection imposes itself. What if this ancient civilization was not only recording the world around them, but trying to warn the next cycle? And what if what they called the breaking of time was a metaphor for social, environmental, technological collapse, or all of them at once? Artificial intelligence is not mystical, but it begins to show us something beyond archaeology. How much of the past is still intertwined with our present? How much we still do not know? And more importantly, how much we insist on ignoring? Because the question that remains is not only what was discovered, but rather, what else is buried? And why, even after discovering it, we still continue as if nothing had been said. Some researchers believe we are about to enter a new era of historical decoding. With advances in AI, inscriptions that once took decades to interpret are now understood in weeks. But this power raises an even deeper doubt. Are we ready to understand what our ancestors truly wanted to tell us? If civilizations so distant in time managed to carve messages for the future, perhaps we have underestimated their capacity to observe the world, and our place within it. Perhaps true knowledge lies not only in formulas or technologies, but in wisdom left in stones and scrolls, waiting only for the right moment to be heard. After all, if the signs repeat, and the symbols return, then the message is still unfolding. And now that we can read it, only one question remains. What will we do with it?